Hi there, my name is Cassidy, and this is my twin sister Penelope. In the past few years, we've been through so much, and I decided to share our story here because it's just too crazy to keep to ourselves. Before I continue, please hit that notification bell, like and subscribe for more amazing stories. Everyone seems to think that having a twin is super cool. You can read each other's minds, share all your things, and you'll never be lonely. And for a while, it was cool for real. Our mom and dad would show us off to everyone. Our mom was nice, but we always preferred our dad. He'd always take us out to spoil us, and he was always giving us secret gifts. We were his pride and joy, and everybody knew it. Then, when we were 13 years old, our perfect little life started to change. My mom was pregnant with our baby brother, and my dad decided that he needed to make more money. He was able to get a better job in another state, and he had to move for a while. He said that it wouldn't be permanent, so he didn't want us to come along. He promised to visit once in a while. It was weird living without him, but we got used to it after a while. After my brother was born, my mom started acting weird. She'd only pay attention to him, and she completely ignored us. Then it reached the point where she treated us like we were invisible. I remember it started one Saturday morning. Penelope and I woke up and went downstairs for breakfast. "Good morning, Mom," we said. She ignored us. "What's for breakfast?" I asked. There was no response. I opened the fridge and there was only baby food in there. "Let's just go to McDonald's for breakfast," Penelope said. We got dressed and went out. Luckily, we always saved a bit of our allowance so we could afford to treat ourselves once in a while. "What do you think is wrong with Mom?" I asked with a mouth full of pancakes. "I don't know. I hear some women get all weird after having a baby. Maybe she'll snap out of it soon," Penelope replied. "I hope so," I sighed. Our mom ignored us for another week, so we continued eating out a lot. Then, as we were down to our last dollar, our dad decided to pay us a surprise visit. We came home from school on Friday and just saw him sitting there happily in our living room. "Dad!" we both screamed while running into his arms. "My pride and joy, my baby girls. How have you been?" he asked. "We're fine, but we think something is wrong with Mom," I said. Then Penelope nudged me in the stomach. My mom walked in with a bright smile on her face. "Now, there's my lovely family. Dinner's ready. Hi, girls. How was your day at school?" she asked. "Huh?" I said, and my sister looked just as confused. We went to the dinner table anyway. Our dad told us that he'd taken the week off because he missed us so much and that he had made some amazing plans. He let us take a whole week off school, and we went somewhere fun every day. It's almost like he forgot he had a newborn baby and a wife at home. The day before his flight, we canceled our plans and asked if we could all stay home together. We thought this would make our mom happy, but no luck. She was grumpy all day. The day after my dad left, my mom was back to ignoring us. She did this for about a week. Then she'd actually talk to us, but almost everything she said was hateful. I remember when we asked her if we could have some money to buy dresses for the school dance. "Why would you want to go to the dance anyway? I doubt any boy would ask you two out," she said. "Because you're both really ugly and dumb. I don't see why any boy would waste their time on you. Anyway, you're not getting any of my money." We were sad and eventually decided not to go to the dance. Another time, we asked her for permission to go to a friend's sleepover. "What kind of crazy person would invite you two losers to their house anyway?" she asked. "Samantha is our friend, Mom. She's been our friend since kindergarten. Don't you remember her?" Cassidy asked. "Why would I waste my time trying to remember your friends? Anyway, you're not going anywhere. You have to stay home to babysit your brother. I'm going out tonight," she snapped. So we stayed home that night and had our own little sleepover with Jonathan. Cassidy and I were happy that we at least had each other and an adorable little brother. Still, we couldn't figure out what was wrong with our mom. It didn't seem like postpartum depression because she was very kind to Jonathan. She was quite happy too. She only became angry if she saw us or if we spoke to her. This continued for about 2 years. She'd treat us terribly and magically transform into the perfect mom whenever my dad came home. Every time he came, he noticed that we had no new clothes or shoes, so he'd take us shopping. He continued to treat us like we were his little princesses, and every time he left, my mom became angrier. Her hatefulness grew worse and worse. Instead of just saying hateful things, she started making our lives hell. Penelope, did you wake up in the middle of the night to cut your hair? I asked as I gasped at my sister, who woke up looking like a boy. What do you mean? She said while rubbing her eyes. Then she looked at me and her mouth dropped. Where's all your hair? She asked. We ran to the mirror, looked at ourselves, and screamed. At that moment, Jonathan walked in. Mommy throw hair in garbage. Now I have big bothers, he said, then smiled adorably. We were confused, but went straight to the trash can to check. And there it was, her beautiful hair under some old banana peels. We cried, and when our mom came in laughing, we asked her why she had done it. You spend too much money on hair products, and besides, your hair is ugly anyway. Just put on a hat and shut up, she said and walked away laughing. Our dad didn't come home for an entire year that year, and I think it was definitely the worst year of our lives. Our mother realized that she couldn't really break our spirits at home, so she tried to embarrass us instead. She did many horrible things, but the worst one was when she trashed our bedroom, took pictures, and came to our school and passed them out to our friends and classmates. She told everyone that we were dirty and never tidied up after ourselves. We became the laughingstock of the entire school. Our principal asked to speak to our mom that day because he didn't appreciate her doing that. While she was in his office, she told him that we were abusive daughters and she really didn't know what to do with us anymore. He called us in while she was there to scold us. Your mother says you twins are unmanageable. I'm going to give her the name of a boot camp nearby, and if I don't hear about an improvement in your behavior soon, I'll arrange to have you sent there myself. The next week, my mother went back to him and told him we had stolen her money. We were off to boot camp that weekend. It was an awful place for the most horrible types of girls we had ever met. We all slept in one huge dormitory which smelled disgusting. I swear none of those girls had ever heard of a shower. We had to wake up at 4 in the morning to run laps around the field. Then we had a horrible breakfast of stale bread and old tea. After that, we were given ridiculous chores to complete. On our first day, Penelope and I were given toothbrushes and asked to clean all the toilets in the building. Then we did more running, push-ups, and all sorts of strange exercises, while huge women screamed at us. It was like receiving the worst sort of punishment for doing nothing wrong. We went home after a week, completely broken and exhausted. I hope you learned your lesson, our mom said. Why did you do that to us? What lesson did we have to learn? What have we done to you? I asked. She smiled. We went straight to our room. We need to call Dad to let him know what's going on. We have to find a way to get out of here, Penelope said. Mom took our cell phones. How are we going to call him? I asked. Don't worry, Cassidy. I'll find a way, she replied. The next day was Monday, and we went to school as usual. Before our first class, Penelope pulled me into the bathroom and said, Look, I got Mom's phone. Let's call Dad. Wow, how'd you pull that off? I gasped. Just as I grabbed the phone, I saw a text message from our Aunt Suzette, our mom's sister, who was never really fond of us. It read, I think that's a drastic measure. Maybe you should reconsider. What are they talking about? I asked. Let's find out, Penelope replied. We read through their text messages and suddenly it became very clear why our mother was being so mean to us. She told our aunt that she felt that our father paid more attention to us and that she was jealous. They laughed about how she sent us to boot camp and how she cut her hair. But the most horrifying thing we read was that our mother was considering poisoning us. We weren't sure if she meant it as a joke, but we did not want to take any chances. We ran straight to the principal's office to show him, thinking that he could help and get us removed from that house. As soon as we opened the door, our mother was in there crying and our principal looked very upset. Your mother told me what you girls did this morning. I'm very disappointed in you, he said. What are you talking about? I asked. You don't remember setting fire to the living room before leaving for school this morning? He shouted. We did not do that. Listen, our mother is jealous of us. She's crazy. We have her phone to prove it. Please help us. Penelope cried. She handed the cell phone to the principal. Why did you take your mom's phone? He asked. To call our dad. She took our phones away and we need to call him. She's going to try to poison us soon if we aren't taken away, I said. Our mother started to argue, but he told her to be quiet and began reading the texts. She tried to say it wasn't her phone, but when he called her number, it rang. I'm calling the police. he shouted. My mother stood and ran out the door. We sat down, relieved that someone had finally believed us. He called our dad too and explained the whole story. He was very apologetic and promised not to jump to conclusions ever again. We live with our dad now. My mom is in prison, so we all moved away. Our baby brother is confused, but I think he'll be fine. But guess what? Our dad has a whole new family too. He has a girlfriend named Sandra and 2 kids. This was why he wasn't coming home to see us. It turns out my mom was jealous of the wrong people all along.
My mom and I were never close, and she only welcomed me around her when my parents had dinner parties for clients. Even their clients would remark, "Diane, I don't see any pictures with you and Victoria, only her and Victor." My mother would always chuckle, "You know girls and their fathers," before changing the conversation. I know it feels strange, but sometimes I feel as though she is not even my mom. My dad, on the other hand, would always make time for me. He gave me everything I asked for, and my mom never seemed to approve. In her eyes, my life was too easy. "You are spoiling her, Victor. She's going to be too soft for this cruel world out there," she said harshly. I often heard her discussing with my dad wanting to send me to a boarding school, but he would hear nothing of the sort and always dismissed her. But before I go on, please don't forget to like and subscribe and hit that notification bell. You will become mega rich when you're older. Every year, my dad would take a yearly trip with his college buddy, Eric. One week after my dad left for his trip, I was home alone watching movies when the phone rang. "Hello?" I said, my focus still on the movie that I was watching. The person on the other end informed me that the plane that my dad and Eric were in crashed, and there were no survivors. The phone fell from my hand and I burst into tears. I cried my eyes out at the funeral, and I felt I had lost the only person who had ever loved me. I felt as though I had lost my best friend. Shortly after the funeral, my father's lawyer approached my mom and I and asked us to meet him at his office later that afternoon. When we arrived at the office, he greeted us. "I'm sorry for your loss. Let's get down to business, shall we?" I sat down. "Do I really need to be here?" I sniffled, my eyes puffy from crying. "I could drop her off at home and come back," my mom said sweetly, rubbing my hand. I looked at her with a raised eyebrow. "You need to be here since this includes you as well," the lawyer said, looking through the papers on his desk. My mom quickly removed her hand from mine and placed them on her lap. The lawyer read the will, and my eyes widened with surprise as my dad left me an inheritance of $5 million while my mom got to keep the house. I was only 16, so my money was placed in an account, and when I reached age 18, the money would be released to me. My mom yelled as she threw her hands up in the air at the lawyer. "What is the meaning of this? Where is my money? I was his wife!" The lawyer handed my mom a letter as he watched her sternly without saying a word. I watched my mom's face contort angrily as her eyes followed the words on the paper. Without another word, my mom stormed out of the office with the letter in her hand. I thanked the lawyer and exited the office. $5 million, I whispered as I headed to the car park. To my surprise, when I got to the car park, my mother was not there. She left without me. Since I did not have any money on me to take a bus, I had no choice but to walk home. The next year of my life was miserable. My mom moved all my things into the garage, and I was only allowed into the house to use the bathroom. "I told your father that the world was a cruel, cruel place, but he doesn't listen. It's time for you to learn how the world works, Victoria," my mother said harshly when I asked her how I was supposed to survive without money. Shortly after my mom moved me to the garage, I took a job at the community library after school since I was no longer given an allowance. At the library, I was able to get my homework done and do any research that was needed since I no longer had access to a computer at home or even a phone. After completing my homework and all my tasks at the library, I would sit and read stories about the rich and famous. I often dreamed about the lifestyle that I would live once I got my $5 million. One evening, as I sat studying for my exam the next day, the smell of my mom's cooking drifted into the garage and my tummy rumbled. I meekly walked into the kitchen and saw my mom preparing dinner. I clutched my stomach. "Mom, I'm really hungry. I used the last of the money I had to purchase a textbook for school. May I have some dinner, please?" I asked. She retorted, "Use the $5 million your dad gave you to get some food since you were hungry. With $5 million, you could buy anything you want." She cackled before she turned her back on me. That night, I decided to sneak into the house after my mom went to bed to get something to eat. Much to my dismay, when I tried to open the refrigerator, I realized that she placed a lock on it. I looked around at the kitchen cupboards in shock and realized that she placed locks on everything. Even the microwave was locked and chained. That night, I went back to the garage and fell asleep on a hungry stomach. I told myself that I might as well make the best of a bad situation. I tried to clean out the garage on numerous occasions to make it feel more like a living space, something that I could be proud of. But every time I got back home, there were boxes and boxes of junk waiting for me in the garage. After a few months of that back and forth, I decided to just leave it. At least I had my bed to sleep on. About a year after my father's death, while sitting at the desk in the library, a boy around my age walked up. "Hi," he said shyly. I looked up from my magazine. "Hi, can I help you?" He cleared his throat and responded, "My name is Kyle. I've been looking at you for some time." He trailed off. "What do you mean, looking at me?" I asked, now very conscious of my worn-out jeans and t-shirt that I wore. He cleared his throat again. He inhaled deeply before he continued. "I would like to take you out if you're interested." I leaned back into my chair and looked him over. His face was familiar, but I couldn't quite place where I knew him from. "Thanks for the invitation, but I have too many things on my plate at the moment to entertain boys. If, however, you need help to find, return, or check out a book, then I am your girl." He smiled and nodded at me before he turned and walked away. Over the next 2 weeks, I noticed him around the library. He would always leave me little trinkets on my desk, like chocolates and candy. One time he even delivered a bouquet of flowers, vase and all. He checked out a wide variety of books. I suspected that he checked them out just to get to talk to me, and it worked. After about a month of him requesting a date with me, I finally told him yes. We seemed to hit it off from the first date. I would always be waiting outside the house when he drove up, and I would always wait until he pulled off before heading towards the garage. It looked as though my luck was finally turning around. Our favorite place to go was Maria's Pizzeria. We would often order a large pizza and drinks, and I would usually carry the remainders home. During one of our dates, I asked, "So, tell me," as we waited for our pizza to arrive, "where are you from? What brought you to this town?" He looked at me from across the booth. "Well, my dad passed away a while back, and I just turned 18. It was just me and him living at home since my mom died when I was young. I knew my dad went to college here, so I sold the house when I reached 18, and here I am," he said dramatically. "Well, I am glad you chose here," I laughed. That night after he dropped me off, I realized that I forgot my jacket in his car. I didn't have a phone to call him. I must have dozed off because I woke up to the sound of my mom quarreling with someone. "Do you know what time it is? Why are you ringing my doorbell at this hour?" I couldn't hear what the other person was saying, but I recognized his voice. It was Kyle. "No one by that name lives here," my mother said, followed by the slamming of the front door. My heart sank, and I felt sick to my stomach. I heard a car drive off. How was I to face him tomorrow? How was I going to tell him that I lived in my mom's garage? That night, I didn't get much sleep. The next few days seemed like a blur as everyone seemed to be in exam mode and the library was packed. Kyle didn't show up at the library the next few days, and I was a bit sad and worried. Luckily, by the time I got home each night, I was too exhausted to overthink and fell asleep as soon as my head hit the pillow. The following week, after repacking some books on the shelf, I returned to my desk and saw a single rose. I turned around anxiously and scanned the faces in the library. Our eyes met, and I smiled. Kyle got up from the table where he sat. He was holding a shoebox in his hand, and he came towards me. "How have you been? Where did you go? I thought I would never see you again." The questions tumbled from my mouth. "Are you ready to leave? I can answer all your questions at Maria's," he said. I nodded and followed Kyle out of the library. After ordering, we sat down and waited in an awkward silence. Our food came and we both picked at our meal. "So, where have you been?" I asked, searching his eyes for answers. He pushed his plate aside and placed the box that he held earlier in front of him. "I had to return home to collect some things. I had a meeting with my dad's lawyer." He came over and sat next to me. He opened the box and took out a few items from it. They looked like souvenirs. I held my breath as I realized that I recognized some of them. "This is my dad with his college buddy," he said as he showed me the picture. There he was, my dad, smiling one of his warm smiles next to Eric and Kyle. Kyle was Eric's son. I finally realized where I recognized Kyle from. It was from pictures that my dad showed me. I began to cry. Kyle tried to console me, but he couldn't understand. Through my tears, I heard myself telling him about my dad's accident, my inheritance from my dad, and my living conditions for the past year. "That's why when I came the other night, your mom said that she didn't know you. Why didn't you tell me about your mom sooner?" I wiped my eyes. It's not really a great starter topic for a first date now, is it? From that night forward, we decided to date steadily. That night, we also shared our first kiss. I felt as though I knew Kyle my whole life since my father often spoke fondly of him, and the next few months were simply amazing. 6 months before my 18th birthday, something very strange happened. One night while Kyle was dropping me off, I noticed my mother at the window. I expected her to come out and create a scene, but she didn't. But that wasn't the strange part. The strange part was what happened the day after. My mom came into the garage. "Hi, Vicky, can we talk?" My mom never called me Vicky. That name was always used by my dad. I looked up from my school books that were scattered across the bed. I know that since your dad died, that it has been hard for you. It has been hard for me too. I'm sorry about the way that I treated you, and I would like to apologize. I was wondering if you would consider coming back into the house and live again. I'm so sorry about how I treated you. She hugged me and we both cried. She insisted that I no longer had to work at the library and to just focus on my studies since it was what my father would have wanted. My mom and I went to the mall and shopped together, got manicures and pedicures. We even took a few photos together, which we framed and hung at home. I felt as though my life was finally falling back into place. We spoke about Kyle, and my mom invited him over for Sunday dinner one evening. She apologized for how she treated him the first night. The next few months, Kyle would spend the weekends with us, then head back home Sunday evening. What more could a girl want? My mother was finally treating me as I always hoped, and I had a great boyfriend who adored me. 2 weeks before my 18th birthday, I was sick. A lot. I didn't mention it to my mother or Kyle. The day before my 18th birthday, I took a pregnancy test, and guess what? It was positive. I was ecstatic. It wasn't as though I wouldn't be able to take care of the baby. After all, I was a millionaire, and I was sure that Kyle would be just as excited as I was. Finally, my 18th birthday had arrived. I had a meeting with a lawyer, and then I had to meet with Kyle. I wanted to get a checkup by the doctor before mentioning the pregnancy to Kyle. During the meeting with the lawyer, I was asked to sign some papers as he handed over the accounts to me. Don't spend it all in one place. He smiled as I handed him back the signed papers. I won't, I chuckled. As soon as I left the lawyer's office, I decided to take a trip to the doctor's office. After about 30 minutes sitting in the waiting room, the door to the doctor's office opened. Don't forget to take the prenatal vitamins. They will be good for you and the baby. Daddy, take care of Mommy and the baby. My jaw dropped and my heart sank, and I looked up and saw my mother and Kyle had just stepped out of the doctor's office. I quickly pulled a magazine that I was reading in front of my face and sat quietly in the corner of the crowded office. I bit my lips as I tried to hold back the tears. I peeked from behind the magazine and watched in horror as my mother and my boyfriend left hand in hand. I was heartbroken. My mother and my boyfriend? I left the doctor's office soon after and sat in the car, still not believing what I just saw. If you were in my shoes, what would you do? Should I confront them, or should I just take my $5 million and disappear? Please comment your answers down below.
Hi, I'm Maylin, and I live in San Francisco with my dad, stepmom, and 3 stepsisters. Before I was born, my parents moved here from Shanghai because my dad got a really good job with an engineering firm. Sadly, I never met my biological mother. All I knew was that she disappeared after I was born. I don't know how or why. But before I continue my crazy story, and it's about to get really crazy, please don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. Be sure to hit that notification bell to ensure you don't miss out on any more cool stories. My dad took care of me all on his own until he met Charlotte, my stepmom. I was 6 years old the first time I met her. I thought she was gorgeous. She had curly blonde hair and hypnotizing green eyes that would change color sometimes. She also had a warm, loving personality, and I was very comfortable having her around. When she was just dating my dad, she'd bring me toys and my favorite cookies. Apparently, it's really easy to win my affection with food. It was fun having her around. It was hilarious trying to teach her how to speak Chinese and how to use chopsticks. After a few months, my dad married her, and they've been a happy couple since then. 3 children later, and their love is still strong. She treats me like I'm her own. From the outside, my life seemed perfect and complete, but I could never stop thinking about my biological mother. My dad didn't even have a picture of her, and whenever I asked him questions about her, he'd quickly change the topic. All he would let me know was that she was in China. My grandparents, on my dad's side, were the same. They still lived in Shanghai, and we'd communicate on Skype. If I mentioned my mom, the call would somehow get disconnected, or they'd pretend that they hadn't heard me. This was frustrating. Why didn't they want to tell me anything about her? I wouldn't exist if it weren't for her. When I turned 16, I decided that I'd have to take matters into my own hands, and that if nobody wanted to give me any information, I'd find it myself. Before summer, I begged my dad to enroll me in a summer camp a few miles away. I told him I volunteered to be a mentor there, and that it would be very good for my development. But that wasn't my plan at all. I was going to find my mom somehow, even if it meant traveling across the world all on my own. 2 nights before I was supposed to leave for camp, I took my dad's credit card and I booked a flight to China. I also searched Airbnb for somewhere cheap where I could stay for at least a week. I'd never done anything like that in my life, and my dad didn't suspect a thing. When the day arrived, I told my dad that my best friend Charlene was also going to camp, and that her parents would give me a ride there. I'm lucky that he trusts me because he believed everything. I called a cab and I was on my way to the airport. I knew my way around because my family and I always went on vacations together. After I checked in, I bought some snacks for the long flight and a few new books from the bookstore. Everything seemed to be going my way because when I got to my seat on the plane, it was covered in baby vomit. The only other available seats were in first class, so the crew had no choice but to send me there. It was amazing. I'd never flown first class before, and for the longest flight of my life, too. I watched a few movies, slept, ate, read, and slept again. It seemed like a never-ending, thrilling journey. But when we finally arrived at the Shanghai airport 13 hours later, I felt relieved. I was finally going to see my mom, or at least I hoped. My head began to fill up with doubts. Like, did you know that the population of China is 1.3 billion? How was I going to find one person among so many people? What if I get lost? What if I never saw my family again? Meilin, shut up. You've made it this far and you've got to continue, I told myself. After I collected my bags, I went outside and caught a taxi. I gave him the address to my Airbnb and he drove there quickly. I finally became grateful for my dad, who forced me to go to Chinese classes back in San Francisco. I could read all the signs, and I found it quite easy to communicate with everyone. I didn't feel completely lost at all. In fact, something about this place felt like home, and I felt very calm and peaceful. My home for the next few days would be a small bedroom with a little bed and cute little decorations everywhere. I was staying with a family who was renting a bedroom in their house to make some extra money. After I unpacked a few of my things, I decided to contact my dad to let him know I was okay. I asked the owner of the house, and she let me use her phone. "Hi, Dad, it's me," I said. "Where are you?" "We bumped into Charlene in the supermarket, and she knew nothing about summer camp. How could you lie to us like this? You're in very big trouble, young lady. Are you with some boy?" "I hope you're not with some boy," he said. "I'm in China, Dad. I used your credit card to pay for the ticket." "I'm sorry, but I've really got to do this for myself. I'm going to find my mother," I replied. "You need to come home at once. Please. I won't even punish you for what you did. It's not safe," he said, but I hung up. I didn't need that kind of negativity in my life. And how is it not safe? The next day, I decided to go to a popular media company. My plan was to get them to create a news piece about me, how I had lost my mom when I was a little girl and that I wanted to meet her. Because I couldn't get Google Maps to work, I had to try to explain the directions to a taxi driver. It was a bit difficult, but he eventually got me there. I walked into the building and explained to a receptionist that I had a very important story and that I needed to speak to a journalist quickly. "What is so interesting about your story?" "Our journalists are very busy people," she replied while looking annoyed. I explained my entire life story to her, and at the end, she looked quite overwhelmed. I sort of wanted to laugh. She took me upstairs and straight into the office of a middle-aged woman. She told her my situation, and they agreed to let me record my story. They said they'd air it that same day and wished me the best. I felt quite pleased with myself, so after that, I decided to go sightseeing. After all, it was my first time in China, the land of my ancestors. I was starving, so I went to sample the street food. I ate about 1,000,000 soup dumplings and rice balls. Then I washed it all down with some milk tea. After that, I found a tourist bus, which was quite cheap. It stopped at different locations and allowed us to get down to take some pictures. The view from Jinmao Tower was splendid. I felt like a little bird so high above the world below. But I think my favorite place of all was the Jade Buddha Temple. When I got back to my Airbnb, the owner was waiting for me with a concerned expression on her face. "Your father called for you. He said you must call him back, and that it's very urgent. Here's my phone. Please do it right away," she said. I took the phone and dialed home. "Meilin, is that you?" My dad answered. "Yes, what's so urgent? I had a great day today. I went to a media house and then I ate," I said, but he cut me off. "There's a reason we don't talk about your mother. Listen to me carefully. I'm about to tell you the truth about everything. And when I am done, I want you to go straight to your grandparents' house. I will send you the address. You can stay there tonight and I want you on the next flight back to San Francisco. Tomorrow, if possible," he said. "The real reason your mom and I left China is because her family didn't approve of our relationship. For years, she refused to introduce me to her parents. Then I found out she came from one of the wealthiest families in Shanghai, but they were very dangerous, and they had made most of their fortune by causing harm to others. They have always been very particular about who they allowed to marry into their family. For one, they had to be equally wealthy. They had already arranged for your mother to marry someone else. She hadn't even told them about me. When they found out about our relationship, they threatened to kill me, so we had no choice but to leave. Just after you were born, you were kidnapped by people your mother's family had hired. I don't know how they found us. The ransom? The only way we could save you was to let your mother go back to China to marry the person they chose for her. There was nothing else we could do, so we had to sacrifice our love and our marriage to save you. If they hear that you are there and looking for her, they might try to hurt you. You need to leave now, he said. I was too shocked to say much after that. He texted my grandparents' address to me. I said thank you to my hosts, got my bags, called a taxi and left. I had a headache from my father's story. I didn't understand why he had kept such a secret for such a long time. When I arrived at my grandparents' house, I knocked on the door. I had never met them in person before. My grandma opened the door. "Maylin, you're all over the news," she said as she hugged me tightly. "I'm so happy to see you. And I'm sorry, but your father is right. I've already booked a ticket for you to leave tomorrow," she said. I hugged my grandpa too, and they asked me to sit down for dinner. The food was amazing. They were in the middle of telling me funny stories about my dad's childhood when we heard a knock at the door. "Oh, it must be the flowers I ordered," my grandma said while getting up to open the door. I heard the door open, then I heard a scream. My grandpa and I ran to see what was wrong. My grandma was frozen and a lady was standing in front of her. "What's wrong, Grandma?" I asked. "It's your mother," she gasped. The woman closed the door behind her and walked towards me. "My dear Maylin, the last time I saw you, I could fit you in my arms. My precious child. I'm so sorry about everything that happened," she said. I looked at her carefully and realized it was like looking at an older version of myself. I could do nothing but run to her and give her a very long hug. We were both crying. My grandparents brought out some tea and we all sat and spoke. My mother told me that she found out that I was here on the news, and she figured I'd be here with my grandparents. She explained that she had to sneak out because her husband didn't know about me, and she needs to continue to keep me a secret from him. She said she'd get a new phone just to talk to me, and that she'd contact me once I got back to San Francisco. I am back home now, and I'm very happy that I accomplished my goal. I speak to my mom almost every day now, and I think that when I'm an adult, I'll go back to visit her. I've been learning so much about her, and I've discovered that we have so much in common. This whole experience has taught me the benefit of going after what you want in life. My dad and stepmom don't trust me anymore, though. Go figure.
When I moved to a new school, I wasn't that nervous if I'm being completely honest. Sure, I know that moving to a new school can be quite scary, especially if you don't know anyone. But I just wasn't nervous. I'm quite an outgoing person, so I find it easy to make friends. So when I moved to that new school, I thought this was going to be a great start to a new chapter in my life. Little did I know that everything would go downhill from that point on. But before I go on, make sure you like and subscribe and hit that notification bell so you'll become the most popular kid at school. Trust me, it really works. I had to move because of my mom's work. You see, my mom was a workaholic. She had business trips all over the world and she spent more time overseas than at home with me and my dad. My dad also worked at this huge tech company, and I know this may sound sad, but I never really saw my parents that much. My mom was being moved to a different company, so that was why we had to move. I wasn't that bothered, to be honest. My old school was all right, I guess, and I didn't really have many friends there. The kids there were pretty nerdy. All they cared about was homework and tests and school. They weren't fun. So I was hoping when I moved to this new school, I would find someone who was more like me. Fun, carefree. Not to say I didn't get good grades. I was still pretty smart, but I knew life wasn't all about work. Unlike my parents. Anyways, my first day at school was pretty eventful. As soon as I arrived at the classroom, a few girls came up and started picking on me. "Hey, look at the new kid," said one girl rudely. "Oh God, what are you wearing?" I looked down at my plain white top and jeans. "What?" "It's so ugly," she said. "Hey, what's your name?" I sighed. "Jane." The girl's face lit up. "Oh my God, this is perfect. You're plain Jane." Everyone in the class started laughing and pointing fingers at me. As it turned out, this new school wasn't going to be that great. The rest of the school day was miserable. No one talked to me, and when I tried to make friends, they would turn away because they didn't want to be seen with plain Jane. At lunch, I sat at a table all by myself. It was like I had the plague or something. No one wanted to come within a few meters of me. When I got home, I told my parents about how terrible it was. "Don't worry, Jane," said Mom. "Things will work out better in the end." "Yeah, don't worry," added Dad. "You just wait, you'll see." And I did wait, but nothing changed. Well, one thing did. One thing that turned my world upside down. It was a stormy night. I was at home with my parents. We were having spaghetti bologna for dinner, and we were out of spaghetti, so my mom went to the grocery store to get some. I was kind of nervous since it was really stormy outside, but I knew my mom would be fine. But then an hour passed. She should have been back by now. Then 2 hours. I was freaking out by this point. My dad called the cops and they went to search for her, but they couldn't find her. My mom had disappeared. For the rest of that night, there was still no sign of my mom. There were security cameras on the highway that spotted her driving up the road, so she definitely left in her car towards the grocery store. But then the security cameras lost her. She hadn't had an accident because there was no reports of any crashes on her route. So where could she be? She wouldn't have just abandoned us. Something must have happened. What if someone kidnapped her? I was so worried. For several weeks, there was still no sign of Mom. She wasn't answering her phone. We put up posters around town, but no one said they had seen her. It was like she had never existed. Meanwhile, school was worse than ever. I now had 3 bullies who actually picked on me every day. I had no friends, and now my mom had disappeared. Could things get any worse? Well, apparently they could. You see, my dad hadn't handled my mom's disappearance very well. Sometimes I would hear him crying in the shower, and I knew he wasn't getting much sleep. It was to be expected, but sometimes I would just wish that my dad would comfort me, not the other way around. I was the one who had lost my mom. And then came that fateful day. The day that changed everything. I came home from school to find my dad was gone. At first, I freaked out, thinking now my dad had disappeared. But pretty soon, I heard his car pull into the driveway. I went to the window to watch him come in, but I was surprised to see he was carrying a huge cardboard box, and he brought it into the living room. "What's this?" I asked. Dad didn't say anything. He just looked really excited. He opened it and revealed inside a human-sized doll. It had blonde hair and a pretty dress on. I was so shocked I didn't even know what to say. But finally, after a few minutes of staring in surprise, I managed to say something. "Dad, why do you have a doll?" I asked. Dad didn't say anything, though. He just patted the doll and smiled. Then he picked it up and carried it into his office. I was so confused. First, Mom left, and now Dad had this weird doll. It was like he was trying to replace my mom with a doll. I was getting really freaked out by this point. I decided to spy on my dad, and I went round to the back of the house where there was a window looking into his office. I sneaked up, and what I saw made my whole world explode. The doll was sitting on a desk, and my dad was talking to it. Like a real person. He was even stroking its head and seemed to be having a conversation. I was so creeped out, I just had to leave straight away. I ran straight into my room and I locked the door. Was Dad going crazy? Is that what had happened? This wasn't normal, right? But I decided to give my dad the benefit of the doubt. Maybe there was a logical explanation for all of this. Maybe he was just looking after the doll for someone else? But that seemed unlikely. I decided to go outside and ask Dad what was going on. It was dinner time by then, and I heard Dad in the kitchen. I went into the dining room, and I screamed. There, sitting up at the table, was the human-sized doll. "Dad!" I screamed. Dad came running into the dining room. "What is it, Jane? What's wrong?" I pointed at the doll. I was shaking. "Oh," Dad chuckled. "That's just Sophia. She's going to have dinner with us." I felt my jaw drop. My mom's name was Sophia. Did my dad really name the doll after his missing wife? "Dad, are you okay?" I asked nervously. Dad looked confused. "What? Of course I am. Go on, sit down at the table. Dinner will be ready soon." "But..." "Jane, do as you're told." I had no choice but to sit down at the table. I tried to sit as far as possible from the doll. It was like it was staring at me. It wasn't alive, was it? I laughed nervously at myself, but I still tried to avoid eye contact with the doll. Dad came with the dinner, and he spent the rest of the evening chatting to the doll, having a conversation, even though it was only one-sided. Think that was weird? Wait till I tell you about the other weird stuff my dad did with the doll. He took us on family trips. My dad would carry the doll into the car and buckle her up while I sat in the back. Then we'd go on trips, riding around the country, visiting tourist destinations and attractions. All the while, I thought I was losing my mind. Well, rather, my dad was losing his mind. This was crazy, insane. As we drove by, I could see people staring at us. They were probably wondering who this crazy man was with a huge doll in the passenger seat. I was wondering the same thing. By now, I knew I had to call the police. My dad was a lunatic. My mom was missing. I was pretty sure my dad had done something to my mom and then replaced her with the doll. But why? And where was mom? But before I could, something happened that none of you would expect. I was at home in my room. Dad was in the living room, probably talking to the doll again. I was sitting doing homework, and then I heard a car pull in the driveway. I was wondering who it was, so I went out to see, and then I felt my jaw drop. That car. I recognized it. It was my mom's car. I ran outside, and sure enough, there was my mom, walking up the path. I couldn't believe it. "Mom!" I yelled. I ran straight to her and hugged her. She stroked my head. "I'm sorry I had to go for so long, Jane," she said. "Why did you go? What? Where?" I was so confused, but I was mostly just happy to have my mom back. Things were getting really crazy at home. I had to go into hiding," explained Mom. "What? Why?" "Because, well, Jane, I'm not exactly an honest person. I'm actually a criminal." "A criminal?" "Shh, not so loud. Yes, a criminal. Well, sort of. You see, I work in an undercover organization that targets the rich. We sort of steal money from them, but we don't keep it for ourselves. No, we deal it out to the poor. I guess you could call us the Robin Hood group." "But why did you have to leave?" "Some bad people were after me, so I had to lay low for a while. But they're gone now, and I can come back home. I'm so sorry I had to do this to you, darling." I nodded, but I was still stunned. So much had happened in such a short amount of time. Mom guided me back inside the house, and we walked into the living room. Then I felt her freeze. "What on earth?" she said. Dad was sitting on the couch watching TV with his hand around the doll. Dad stared at Mom like he'd seen a ghost. "What? You're back?" yelled Dad. "Yes, I'm back," snapped Mom. "What is this thing?" Dad looked so confused. He looked from Mom to the doll and back again. He scratched his head. "I'm confused." "What's going on?" yelled Mom. "What is this doll doing here?" I felt like I had to step in and explain everything. "Mom, you see, ever since you left, Dad had found it hard to cope, and so he got this doll thing. I know it sounds weird, and listen to this. He named it after you." Mom looked back at my dad in fury. "Well, what do you have to say for yourself?" Dad sat there gaping like a fish. "That's it," yelled Mom. "I leave for a few months and come back to find that you've replaced me with a doll? Fine, have it your way." She rushed to the front door. "Mom, where are you going?" I was scared she was going to disappear again. "Don't worry, Jane, I'm coming back. Just wait here." Mom went into the car and drove off. I was so scared. I didn't want to call the cops because now I knew my mom was sort of a criminal. She might get into trouble. But I was also terrified that she would leave me again. "I'll give her 2 hours," I thought to myself. "If she's still not back by then, I'll call the cops." An hour passed, then an hour and a half. I was just about to grab the phone when I heard Mom's car pull into the driveway again. She got out of the car, and this time she was carrying a huge cardboard box. I felt déjà vu hit me. That big cardboard box looked strangely familiar. She carried it into the living room right in front of my dad, and she started to rip it open. She looked really angry. Then she opened it up and revealed a doll was inside. "Mom, what are you doing?" I yelled. Were both my parents crazy? Mom took out the doll. This one was a male one, and it looked oddly like my dad. My mom picked it up and took it to her room. Dad watched her and seemed to be jealous, but then he looked back at his own doll and seemed to forget about Mom. I just stood there, absolutely shocked. What was going on? That evening, we had dinner at the dining table. I thought this night would be full of joy and laughter now that Mom was back, but there was only silence. My mom and dad sat at opposite ends of the table, and their dolls were sitting next to them. They only had eyes for their dolls. Mom was obviously trying to make Dad jealous, but Dad didn't seem to be bothered. The evening ended with Mom yelling at my dad and telling him she was going to divorce him. And, well, she did. My mom and dad divorced, and my mom thankfully won custody. I still don't know what happened to my dad. Maybe my mom's disappearance triggered something in his brain that caused him to lose his mind. I don't know. What I do know is that to this day, my dad still has that doll. My mom, of course, got rid of the male doll. I'm just glad that at least one of my parents is still sane, even if she is a criminal.